It was too late. Diana wasn't sure how late it was, but she was damn sure it was too late for anyone to call. She hoped it was Marty's phone. Anyway, she just covered her face with a pillow and said thank you loudly when the call stopped after the fifth ring. She had just managed to get comfortable when the bell rang again. "Damn it!" she screamed, opening her eyes again. "Martin, answer your damn—" The words stopped suddenly when she realized that her husband was not in bed with her. She glanced at the clock, 3:37 a.m., as she picked up her phone from the nightstand and wondered why her husband wasn't there. He was there when they went to bed a few hours ago. "Yes. Hello, hello?" She muttered something into the phone. "Is this Diana Miller?" Yes, that's true. Who is this?" "Are you Martin Miller's wife?" "Yes, for God's sake, yes. Who is this?" "Mrs. Miller, this is the emergency room at Northtown Medical Center. Your husband was brought in about an hour ago, and we had your contact information from the incident a year ago. He got into a car accident. Could you come over right now?" "My God, is he okay?" "I have no right to discuss his condition over the phone, ma'am." "Please come." "Yes, sure. I'll be there as soon as I can." She ran upstairs where her daughter was sleeping. Dallas, named after the city in which she was conceived, attended a local university but lived at home to save money. She enjoyed living in the dorms her freshman year, but as she got older, she realized that living close to campus would not be conducive to her studies. "Dal, wake up. Nothing." "Dally, wake up." This time, pushing her lightly on the shoulder. Still nothing. "Dallas, wake up." Dallas sat up straight in bed and tried to force her blurry eyes to focus. The light was on in the room. "Dallas, your father was in an accident. He's in the emergency room. You need to get dressed. We have to go." She rolled out of bed and pulled her nightgown over her head, not thinking about the fact that at the age of 20 she was standing naked in front of her mother. For her part, Diana didn't even notice, as she was too busy pulling out clothes for Dallas. Finally dressed, the two women drove to the hospital as quickly as possible. Dallas began bombarding her mother with questions about what happened, but Diana had no more information. It seemed like an eternity before they got there, but it was only about 10 minutes considering the lack of traffic. They were shown to Martin's room in the emergency department and were shocked by his condition. He was covered in bandages and clearly unconscious. They were given forms to fill out. "Your grief does not free you from paperwork." Dallas moved her chair to be closer to her father. They stayed there for about an hour before a man and woman in police uniform entered. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm Officer Gail Stanton, and this is my partner, Robert Hansen. We were the first to arrive at the scene. Any news on how he's doing?" "Nobody told us anything, officer," Diana answered. "Oh, this is my daughter, Dallas. We need to ask you a few questions. I know now is not the right time, but it's better to do this as soon as possible." "Certainly. Do you know what your husband was doing on the street at such a time?" "He was at home, and we went to bed together around 10 p.m. I didn't even know he was gone until the hospital called." "Ma'am," said Officer Stanton Dallas. "Can you confirm this?" "Actually, yes. We watched a movie on TV which ended at 10, and then we all went to bed. I saw Dad go into the bedroom with Mom." "What movie?" "Something with Keanu Reeves. Some kind of action movie. Dad chose him. It was his turn." "Did you have any special problems? Maybe financial or marital? Nothing that all married couples haven't faced?" "No special problems, no. I just don't understand why he came out without my knowledge. Were the people in the other car hurt?" "That's the point, Mrs. Miller. It was a single car accident. And according to two witnesses, your husband's car was driving fine and then, quite suddenly, accelerated straight into the large oak tree that sits at the corner of Highways 121 and 288. There were no skid marks, and no one remembers seeing brake lights." Diana and Dallas looked at the officers when it became clear what they were suggesting. "Are you implying that my husband did this on purpose? That he tried to commit suicide? We need to inspect the car for possible mechanical problems, and of course we will need to talk to your husband when he comes to." but that's certainly one of the possibilities that we're looking at, yes. Are you sure there weren't any problems worth talking about? Officers, I love my husband very much and we have a wonderful marriage. No, there are no problems that I could think of. I'm sure it was just because he lost control or dozed off. It was already very late. I'm sure there is reasonable. Diana burst into tears and could not finish the sentence. Officer Stanton placed one of her cards on the table, asking them to call if they remembered anything else, and then left the hospital. Dallas closed the door to Martin's room. You didn't tell them? No, Dallas, I didn't, her mother replied when the tears subsided. It's none of their business and has nothing to do with it. Your father didn't mind. Perhaps he will say something when they talk to him. Then we'll see. The next few days passed slowly. Martin remained unconscious and was hospitalized, while Diana and Dallas spent as much time there as they could. They were often there together and made sure that he was never left alone. Luckily, Diana knew Martin's boss and called him to tell him what had happened and that he would miss work. She carefully avoided saying anything that might make anyone think it could be a suicide attempt. The accident happened Saturday night, and Martin eventually began showing signs of waking up Wednesday morning. By noon, his eyes were open, although he could only look around. Diana was there and noticed his eyes and came to the bed to reassure him that everything would be fine. A few seconds later, a nurse hurriedly entered the room. Something on the monitors warned her that the patient had woken up. Diana returned to her seat to let the nurse do her job. Soon, more doctors entered the room to check on Martin. Diana took the opportunity to go outside to call Dallas and tell her that her father had woken up. Dallas didn't answer, so she left a voicemail. Soon, most of the medical paraphernalia was removed. Martin's left arm was broken, but he was right-handed, and this should not have hampered him too much. His throat was sore from the tube, so he was given a white board so he could communicate. The nurse read the message and asked him if he was sure. Martin nodded his head. The nurse quickly walked out into the hallway while the tests continued. Mrs. Miller, I must inform you that your husband has asked that you not be allowed back into his room. And my daughter, too. What? He is my husband. I have the right to be there with him. I'm very sorry, Mrs. Miller, but the patient's wishes come first. Let me just talk to him. We'll work things out. Diana tried to get past the nurse but couldn't get any closer, so she resorted to screaming. Martin, please talk to me. What's happening? Martin. Mrs. Miller, please stop screaming. You're disturbing our other patients. You can wait outside the room if you wish, but if we catch you trying to enter the room or making noise, we'll send you out of the building. Have I made myself clear? Yes, of course. Diana had no choice. Dallas finally made it to the hospital 45 minutes later. She found her mother sitting in a chair outside the room. Mom, why are you here? Your father forbade us to enter the room. Us? I mean, I understand why he banned you, but why me? What the hell does that mean? And why did it take you so long to get here? I had just woken up when Bradley came in to see how I was doing. We're kind of... God. You had sex with your boyfriend instead of being here for your father? I'm sorry, Mom, but he was unconscious when I left. Dallas answered in a tone that showed she wasn't sorry. It was really stressful and I needed to relax. It worked really well, for what it's worth. When you have the opportunity, you should call too. I'm not going to do that. And let's not talk about it right now. It's disrespectful. The irony of the situation made Dallas chuckle. There was a knock on the door, followed by a tall, very attractive brunette. She was dressed professionally, but not like a doctor, although her badge identified her as an employee. Good morning, Mr. Miller. I'm Dr. Lassiter, one of the hospital's mental health specialists. How are you feeling? As good as could be expected, I suppose. 9 days have passed since the accident. He regained the ability to speak. The white board was a thing of the past. He asked about when he might be released and was never able to get a straight answer. Still, the hospital asked me to talk to you. This is fine? I have a choice? Not if you want to return home soon. I really have to free you to let you go, the psychiatrist answered with a puzzled smile on her face. Then let's begin. Dr. Lassiter pulled one of the chairs up to the bed and sat down, crossing her long legs. It took her a few minutes to look through the papers. Okay, so you were brought in a little over a week ago after an accident, a collision with a large tree. I also see that you have banned your wife and daughter from visiting you, and I suspect that these things are somehow connected. I see, Martin replied. She cheated on me. Unfortunately, this is a common occurrence these days, although it rarely leads to such a reaction. Is there more to this? Martin was silent for several minutes. He really didn't want to talk about it, especially with a pretty woman. He wondered if they had a guy, a really old guy that he could talk to. Dr. Lassiter waited patiently. This wasn't the first time she had to wait for someone to force herself to speak. Her patience was rewarded. I suffered from depression, I think. Nothing that was diagnosed or anything like that. I was just, well, like I said, depressed. From something specific or just in general? I think I couldn't, since I didn't have erections. A little more than a year. After the previous accident, right? Of course she knew. She probably had his entire medical history in her hands. She just wanted to make him say it. Right. It wasn't even an accident. I was in the back seat, my boss was in the passenger seat, and his boss was driving. We were hit from behind. There were no airbags or even very large damage, but I was not prepared for that. I hit my head on the seat in front of me. I'm guessing that was the reason. The report says you suffered a blow and a mild concussion. My doctors couldn't explain it. None of the drugs, it didn't work at all. They ran a bunch of tests, some multiple times, and the best explanation I got was that something happened, and part of my brain was damaged. So you couldn't achieve erections, which led to your wife eventually becoming dissatisfied with your sex life, which in turn led to her having an affair. This eventually wore you down and led to the events of that evening. Is this something like this? In a nutshell, yes. And how long did it take before your wife did this? 7 or 8 months, I think. We tried to take care of things in other ways. Well, you know there are certain kinds of helpers. Yes. I understand how it works, Mr. Miller. I've already had sex before. Of course, sorry. I just feel a little uneasy. Anyway, at first everything was fine, and we hoped that my ability would return. We'd talk about spending the entire weekend in bed, having a really good time. Of course, this never happened. Eventually, this went on for so long that she decided to take care of her needs elsewhere. Did she discuss this with you beforehand? No. I found out about this when I came home from work early. Cliché, I know. And not only was she at home with her lover, but my daughter and her boyfriend were there too. Did they do it as a group? Dr. Lassiter asked, shock evident in her voice. No, thank God. Diana and Bill were in the bedroom, and Dallas and Brad were in the living room. That's how I found out my wife was cheating on me, and my daughter knew about it and apparently approved. Which explains why your daughter was also banned. Yes. Oh, and if I haven't mentioned it before, Bill, Brad's father. We knew him before by chance, as the father of our daughter's boyfriend. I later learned that it was the daughter who suggested Bill to her mother. This is another blow. Did you confront them? Well, not quite. Perhaps if Dallas hadn't been there, I would have run into Diana, but I'd already seen enough of my daughter's anatomy. Then I left. How did the explanation go then? Not what I expected. She was sorry that I knew this, but she made it clear that if I could not take care of her, she would delegate it to someone else, and she preferred a full-time partner, as she put it, to having everyone time to find someone new. Bill was single and had similar needs, so he was her choice. Your actions? What could I do? She was right about me not being able to have sex. It wasn't her fault that I couldn't, so she did what she had to do. What if, hypothetically, she asked you in advance? Would you agree? You know, I thought about it a lot, and part of me wanted to say that I would agree because I loved her and wanted her to be happy. But I don't think I would be happy with that. We made vows, we made promises, and one of them was in sickness or in health. I wouldn't do that to her, so I couldn't handle her doing that to me. Obviously, she continued to see him. Obviously, and now that I knew about it, she was less reserved about it. I don't know if she started doing it more often, since I don't know how often they did it before, but where before it was limited to the day when I was at work, it now included trips to the store on the weekends, and part of that time was clearly spent with Bill. It must have been difficult. Difficult? That doesn't even begin to describe the situation. But again, I didn't think I could do anything. She deserved a sex life, but I couldn't provide it, and it was all killing me. Tell me about the night when the accident happened. The whole family watched the film on TV. I kept my pain, that is, emotional pain, to myself. I think it was a mistake, but I didn't want to burden Diana or Dallas. They kissed and hugged goodnight, while I got a good night from Dallas. I think it was at that moment that I realized that she had completely lost respect for me as a father and as a man. I could hardly blame her, since I didn't respect myself either. I got ready for bed, as usual. Diana did the same. Everything was the same as always. Every night, the same thing. I waited until Diana was asleep, then got dressed and grabbed my wallet and keys. I went upstairs and looked into Dallas's room. She was also sleeping. I blew her a kiss and said goodbye. I went and got into my car. I knew there were airbags there, but I thought if I hit it hard enough, it wouldn't matter. I didn't have a specific plan, I just drove around the area. I knew about the big oak tree, drove past it for the first time and realized that there were no obstacles and a fairly direct approach. I drove around again and headed straight towards him. They sat in silence for a few minutes, both letting the story process in their minds. Finally, the doctor spoke. "Mr. Miller, I want to thank you for being so open and honest with me. That's a great rarity. I'm going to let you rest a little and think about what you've told me. Is it okay if I come back tomorrow?" "I'm not going anywhere," he said sarcastically. They shook hands and Dr. Lassiter left the room. Martin took his mobile phone, which he had left at home that night, and which Diana had brought him before he told her not to, and answered several messages and emails. He also informed his boss of the latest news. Then he closed his eyes and tried to get some sleep. Returning home, Diana tried to control herself. She got the impression that Marty was fine with her meeting Bill, that he had given it to her as a gift because he loved her so much. Even when she first heard about the incident, she no longer believed it was an accident. She was sure it had nothing to do with it, but now she wasn't so sure. She suspected the police were talking to her husband, but hoped he didn't say anything about her relationship with Bill. The police didn't contact her again since sex outside of marriage isn't technically a crime. So maybe they just thought it was a suicide attempt and left it at that. Case is closed. However, he never really minded, isn't it? If so, she couldn't remember it. And besides, she wasn't going to live a life of celibacy just because some idiot decided to frame her husband's boss. This wasn't what she signed up for, and she sure as hell wasn't agreeing to it now. Once Marty returned home, she would try to be more aware of his feelings, more reserved in her relationship with Bill. But there was no way she was going to give up. The next morning, as promised, Dr. Lassiter came in. Marty noticed the external changes in the good doctor's outfit. Alas, little Marty remained a recluse. "How are you feeling this morning, Mr. Miller?" "Not much has changed since yesterday, Doc. Ready to go home, but I think it's up to you." "Well, partially, but you are detained for 72 hours. As required by state law, the countdown of this time begins with our conversation yesterday, so at least 2 more days." "It's okay, Doc. At least the food here isn't that bad." They laughed together. "An oldie but a goodie," Dr. Lassiter noted. "I'm glad to see that you are joking." "Me too. It's been a long time, and by time, I mean months since I felt like myself. I used to be a big joker, to the point where I sometimes got on Dallas's nerves. Have you had any other bad thoughts? Can we find any more dark alleys in your mind?" "You know, Doc, this is not the case. I spent a year feeling pretty depressed and have been depressed for the last few months. I don't feel it anymore." It gave way to anger and disappointment. Disappointed with Diana and Dallas, of course, more with Diana, but mostly disappointed with myself for not standing up for myself, for not letting my wife know that what she was doing was unacceptable. Do you intend to take this position now? Undoubtedly. While I admit I'm tempted to just get a divorce, I have to accept some of the blame for letting her get over me. But if she agrees to stop seeing Bill, then I'm ready to see a counselor and try to repair our marriage. I can appreciate your determination, Mr. Miller. I rarely see such a turnaround happen so quickly. I had a lot of time to think while I was lying here before we met. I appreciate that you gave me the opportunity to express this, to tell someone about it. This allowed me to focus on my thoughts. Excellent, Mr. Miller, simply excellent. In that case, I'm going to finish today. I'll stop by tomorrow for one last chat, but I see no reason why you can't leave on schedule. I'm looking forward to it, Doc. Diana and Dallas were there to pick him up when he was released. If he was going to try to change things, he needed to start by acting as if things were going to change. The airbags were surprisingly effective, much more effective than Marty expected. The worst part was the concussion he suffered, which required him to spend a lot of time resting and relaxing in the dark. The TV was turned off and some soft music was playing in the background. His wife and daughter fawned over him. Everything was fine for a little over a week until Diana announced that she needed to go shopping. "No," Marty said calmly. "What?" Diana answered, confused. "Marty, there are things we need, including some of your healing creams. Make a list for Dallas. She can go." "Why are you dragging me into this, Dad?" "Besides, I have plans to see Bradley." "Then you have an incentive to finish your shopping quickly, don't you?" "Diana, list." "This is funny, Martin. You can't just come home and turn everything upside down. Dallas has plans, and I go to the store, and that's final." "Are you taking me for a fool, Diana?" "Fool? No, Marty, of course not. Why are you asking about this? You think I don't understand that these shopping trips are an excuse to see Bill? I never forgot to come home with groceries, Martin. Never. Yes, and this is an excellent cover, but you've been gone too long, and not only that, but I can see it in you. In your eyes when you don't look at me. In your clothes when they don't look quite right. In your makeup, it's always a little different. At least you spent some of your time with Bill, and that won't happen anymore." The shock in Diana's eyes was obvious, and Dallas suddenly felt a little more respect for her father. "Marty, please. We have already discussed this. Now I will do my best to be more careful. Apparently, I've become a little too relaxed about my meetings, but of course I won't give up on it. I have the right to have a sex life, and I intend to have one. So our vows didn't mean anything? Leave everyone else? In sickness and in health? Well, that's part of the disease, and you don't leave others behind. But you will do it right now. You stop seeing Bill, and we go to a counselor to repair our marriage, or not. And I'll call the divorce lawyer on Monday. You won't do this, Martin Miller. Don't you dare threaten me. If I could have sex with you and only you, I would. But I can't. And it's not my fault. I didn't cause the accident. I wasn't even there. Suddenly, because I had nothing to do with it, my sex life is over, and I should just accept it? It will not happen. So, I'm going to go shopping, see Bill, and take care of my needs. If you want to talk about it later tonight, we can do that. But don't you dare think you can dictate to me what I can and can't do." Without waiting for another word from her husband, Diana walked out of her front door, closing it with a crash that rattled the window. The silence was deafening. Father and daughter looked at each other, and then Marty went to his bedroom. For the first time in her life, Dallas Miller was worried about the future of her family, about her parents' marriage. Dad never really confronted Mom, but nothing that serious had ever happened between them. But, deciding that this was between them, and she could not do anything, she put herself in order and went to meet Bradley. Some part of Diana hoped Marty would never recover because she wasn't sure she'd ever be able to give up on Bill. Bill was aggressive. Bill was strong. He didn't think what he was doing suited her. He just did it. Marty was always so gentle, so attentive, so... Marty. It was already getting dark outside when Dallas returned home. She found her father resting in his bedroom. There was a faint glow, which she realized was coming from the bathroom, where the light was on and the door was slightly open. She realized that her father wanted some light, but none of the lamps in the room burned that low. "Dad." He stood with his back to her and did not turn, but answered. Dallas, I'm sorry. This caught his attention, so he carefully sat up in bed and turned to see his daughter quietly crying in the doorway. What are you talking about? He had stopped calling her all the little pet names he had previously used after he found out that she had helped her mother find a lover, and he was hesitant to do so now, even though she was in tears. He couldn't help but think it was all a setup. Dallas walked closer until she was right at the foot of the bed. I'm sorry for what I did. I was just trying to help my mom, you know? She was so upset about what you had to go through and that you couldn't. Their gazes met for a moment,